Welcome to the HIO Show. I'm Stu Cowan of the Montreal Gazette, joined this week by Eric Engels from Sportsnet, Mike Boone, our HIO blogger, and Andy Bennett from CBC Daybreak. Chris Nyland will be back with us next week. Eric, the Canadiens have signed Paul Byron to a 3-year contract extension, $3.5 million. Obviously, he's not going anywhere before the trade deadline. Just your thoughts, is it too long, this deal, or was
that's the payout for Paul Byron. That's what he gets out of this deal, that it is 3 years long. He doesn't get any trade protection in the deal, so there's no worries there. At a 1.16 cap hits too, this is a player that desperately wanted to stay in Montreal. I spoke to him on Wednesday, and he was just talking about the fact that the reason he was playing his best hockey is because he fits so well with this team. He believes in the pieces they have, guys like Subban, Price, Pacioretty, Bolya is a guy that he mentioned. He just loves it here. His whole family is from the Gatineau area.
His wife's French.
He's just so happy to be here. And when you have a player like that and you have an opportunity to sign them on your terms because he wants to stay and he's willing to not take that opportunity in July, you come to terms, and that's what happened. And Marc Bergevin, as far as the timing is concerned, had to do this now, because if he doesn't get a deal done between now and Monday the 29th, you got to trade Paul Byron. And I think he's worth hanging on to, considering what he's done.
I know a lot of the
Why would you have to trade him on Monday?
Well, he's a pending unrestricted free agent. Well, if you're not going to get a deal done with him, then you might as well ship him out and get some return from him.
Yeah, you could still sign him as a UFA, though, couldn't you? I mean, he's not going to be a strenuously pursued commodity on free agent day. So.
He could be. He fills a role. I mean, I think a lot of the HIO commentators are upset that it's another small guy.
Yeah, but
team to get bigger.
Small, but I mean, I always think of Paul Byron as like Gallagher light. Like he's sort of like, big. He's like a Gallagher type player. He's small. He's half the time he's leading the team on hits in these games lately, which I know we were joking about that last week because he's about my size. So of course he's not a huge threat, but he's done everything they wanted him to do this year. They picked him up off waivers. He's played on, I think, probably every line as well. So he's one of those versatile kind of guys. And it's the price is right. So why not get one of those guys under contract? But I just think it's funny that every year we're like, ooh, trade deadline, so exciting for the Canadiens, and then nothing happens.
The thing I noticed, I had Byron on the ice in the 3-on-3 the other night, and he is effective in that. With
he's
speed.
speedy.
Well, he's fast.
He's made for 3-on-3.
Yeah.
He has explosive speed. He's a very responsible player. He plays the ice well at both ends of it. He can move up and down your lineup. He can play on the power play if you needed to put him there, though I don't think we'd see him there. Maybe under another coach. It's amazing what the power play allotments have been for this coach. But this is a guy that clearly wanted to stay. Why not get it done when you can? And, to your point, Mike, about signing him as an unrestricted free agent, yeah, maybe there aren't 29 teams lining up, but for an elite penalty killer and a guy like that, if you can get him done for $1.16 million, I think it's a little bit of a savings than what he would have got on the open market.
Fair enough. They saved some money. Yeah, good point.
The Michel Therrien, PK Subban topic remains a hot topic in this city, as always. Mike, do you think that Michel Therrien would have singled PK out if he thought he was coming back next season as coach?
Yeah, well, I don't think he thought it through, really. I wonder if they had their customary debrief where everybody chills out before they let the media in and people are advised on what they should or should not say. He sounded like he was firing from the hip, which was very un-Therrien-like that night. And I don't think he was calculating his future into the beginning of next season.
I honestly just think he has almost like a blind spot for PK Subban when he talks about him publicly in the media. That, or he's trying so hard to make sure PK Subban is treated like every single other player on this team, despite the fact that he has this huge contract, despite the fact that people wanted him to be captain, despite the fact that he's giving millions and millions of dollars. So I think he might sometimes go like overboard when trying to make sure it's like, oh, I'm going to treat everybody equally, and then he ends up kind of treating him not equally, because Subban, with the fans and with everybody else who's not the coach, I think gets criticized for things that every other NHL player does every night.
We were talking before the show. You were saying you think that Therrien looks upset at his press conferences recently.
I think he's resigned to the fact that this season has been taken out of his hands, and the decisions that he's going to be forced to make over the next 22 games that the Canadiens have are not the ones that he would necessarily make with this lineup. But, getting back to his decision and what he did, whether it was calculated or it was shooting from the hip, as Mike suggested, which I would tend to agree with, and you're absolutely right. Normally, everything this guy does is calculated. It's stupid. I mean, it was just a stupid thing to do. And looking at the other end of it, you look at the attitude of Subban and the way he handles all of this. I had a conversation with him about 3 months ago about how Terrier treats him in front of the other players, how he might treat him in the media, and how he has to accept that as a beacon in the room, that no matter how he gets treated, depending on how he reacts to it, it's going to send ripples throughout the room. You know, PK is a guy who clearly understands what his relevance and his importance is to this team. And if he handles it the wrong way and he snaps back or whatever it may be, other guys may get the idea that they can treat the coach that way, and then you have dissension and you have a much bigger issue.
Subban understands what 21st century sports and PR are all about.
Sure does.
His coach is freeze-dried in the 50s.
Well, I know a former coach of Subban's at a lower level had mentioned once that he was one of the hardest guys he had to coach, not because he's a bad guy, but he said you would call him in the room, you would say, "Great job, PK, way to go," and be, "Okay, coach," and you'd call him in and you'd yell at him and scream at him and be, "Okay, coach," it just seems to... like you didn't know if you were actually getting through to him, but I think that's just PK's personality.
Exactly. Why is there this desire to like break PK? I don't understand that. I mean, look, I'm not an NHL coach, but sometimes I just think less is more with PK Subban, and I wish we would just accept him, warts and all. I mean, yes, he's going to lose the puck sometimes. Yes, he's going to, try and go end to end sometimes, but it's fun to watch, and most of the time it actually results in some sort of
Sometimes I think Jean Beliveau was both a saint and a curse, because he established the template for what a Montreal Canadiens star ought to be. And not everybody has that personality.
Geez, but PK sure fits in, doesn't he? And the funniest thing about this whole situation is there was just no value in what Michel did. You know, the most hysterical suggestion for me was Max Pacioretty saying, this was a calculated, smart move by Terrier, and look at what PK did the next game. Clearly it worked. He pushed all the right buttons. I mean, I think PK would have come out the next game regardless and played his best hockey. So it's just...
He does every game.
It was almost hysterical.
Unlike Max Pacioretty.
We'll be right back after a short break, and we'll talk a little bit about PK's unusual post-game ritual. Welcome back, everybody. PK Subban has been averaging over 25 minutes a game this season, some games playing as much as 30 minutes. Eric, after a recent game where he did play 30 minutes, you waited for him after the room, and it took a little while for him to come out. How come?
Well, he decided he was going to do an hour-long workout, which was crazy, and I said, okay, you were on the bike. Some players, they ride the bike right after. They want to keep their cardio going and slowly fade down and do some stretching, make sure they stay healthy. He played 30 minutes and did a heavy lifting workout because the Canadiens decided that they were going to have an optional skate the next day, and he'd probably take the option. So his plan was to work out after the game, work out the day of the optional, and not skate. And it speaks to the level of conditioning that this athlete has.
Well, did he know you were waiting, though? Because maybe that may...
No, he didn't. I was waiting for him in the room, and the one time I was planning on writing a single focus column on PK Subban, he wasn't around to talk.
What a coincidence.
So I waited around for him afterwards, and he said, I'm happy to answer a few questions now. But I was up against the clock and waiting around on a cane with my broken leg. So
after I watch a game, I barely have energy to walk a dog. I wouldn't go and lift weights.
We can believe it. We believe it.
Well, that's one of the reasons PK's workout is probably why he has the Ironman streak for the team for the longest consecutive games played. But the medical staff on this team, I think you have to question them a little bit at this point, even though they hate it. I mean, you look at Carey Price, knee injury, comes back, same knee injury. Tom Gilbert, knee injury, comes back, same injury. Nathan Beaulieu gets almost knocked out cold in a fight, comes back to play. At some point, I think you have to...
There are a ton of questions, and it's been years like this. I mean, it was 2 years ago, I think, with Dale Weiss with the concussion in the playoffs, and he came back, and then they come out after and say, oh, yes, he was concussed. Whoops, we put him back in the game, and then completely eviscerate any media member who dares to suggest that perhaps the protocol wasn't followed. And I mean, this happens over and over with these guys. And listen, at some point we have to be able to ask these questions. That is part of the job as a journalist, to ask these questions. And you're not necessarily saying that the medical staff is poor, but answer the questions then if there's nothing to hide.
I hesitate to second-guess doctors, A, because they're litigious, and B, because I'm sure it's done in collaboration with management. To what extent does the medical staff weigh in? To what extent are they overruled?
I'm not saying that I'm smarter than the medical staff, but that's exactly why I want them to explain to me the process in the decision-making.
Well, as Carey Price, the secrecy about his injury drags on, as I mentioned in a column last week, it's like, are they protecting him now, or are they protecting the medical staff now?
My issue is the medical staff doesn't have the power they need to have. And, when it comes to hockey and the culture of hockey, it's always been about bravado. It's always been about playing hurt. There's a pride that these guys have in it. Concussions aside, because we've learned from now, and you'd expect that they'd have learned. Obviously, we're not perfect, but the protocol is moving things forward. And the protocol needs to be adjusted considering what we saw earlier this year with Nathan Beaulieu when he got punched and lost his balance, and it seemed very clear that there was an issue there and nothing was done about it until intermission, and he sat a couple minutes in the box. But the medical staff just doesn't have the power that they need to have, because these decisions should not be in the player's hands. Turning to Carey Price when he's got a knee injury, or it's clear that he has a knee injury, whether they want to admit it or not, and saying, you feel good to go? And he said, what do you think he's going to say? He's going to say, I'm good to go.
When you have every single time a player going back out on the ice injured or possibly concussed, and after the game the coach saying how courageous they were every single time, how can you expect a player to say, you know what, I actually don't think I should go back out there?
Yeah, it's the culture of the sport, absolutely.
But so many Habs fans think Carey Price is going to come back and solve all the problems. I mean, this knee thing goes back to when he got run by Kreider. He missed time after the Olympics. He's been out twice this year. You wonder, Mike, is this career threatening for him? Like, going forward, do the Canadiens need to have?
I would say, in the absence of solid information, yeah, sure. One theory is as good as any other. Maybe it's career threatening.
That's the biggest problem
and if
we
it
have
is,
here.
Oh boy!
That's the biggest problem we have here, is that we can guess, and many people will guess. We've been left to guess, and to sit here right now and say absolutely this is career threatening, we can't say that.
No.
But to ignore the possibility that it is would be foolish.
And this is an injury that at first they said he'll be out 1 week. Then it was 3 weeks. Then it was there. Now it's we're going on 3 months. It's crazy.
And no surgery, so you kind of wonder.
So you wonder what's going on.
That was the only definitive thing we got out of this, is Carey Price doesn't need surgery. I'll tell you this: if he ends up getting surgery in the off season, and they actually put part of next season in jeopardy by waiting this long and all that, everybody should be fired here. Like, everybody.
That's crazy. Now, the trade deadline coming up Monday, a lot of talk. One of the players, Mike, that has been mentioned quite frequently is Lars Eller. Do you think there's a lot of interest out there in him? He's got $3.5 million left on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interest for the same reason that I think they ought to keep him. He's a good player. He fulfills a lot of roles. He's playing on a fairly decent contract, and I think he would be an attractive commodity. I don't know what they think they can get for him, but again, I think he's a solid member of the team. He's done everything he's been asked to do, and a lot of people come down on against the notion that he's a top six center. I think there's possibilities there. I don't consign him to the third line necessarily.
It concerns me sometimes with Eller, because sometimes you think this guy has no vision. But the team has been saying, we need a big centerman. We need a big centerman. Well, Lars Eller, Alex Galchenyuk. I mean, they're not huge, but they're not tiny guys. So it's such a question mark with what they're going to do. Obviously, a lot of talk around Dale Weiss. But the only thing I do know when it comes to the trade deadline, I can make it happen. All I need to do is pour myself a glass of wine on Sunday evening, and then everything is going to start moving.
You reported there is interest in Eller out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in Lars Eller, and mainly from Western Conference and also from a couple of teams in the East. And the reason why is he's a prototypical shutdown third-line center. You try and put him on the second line on the left wing, you're not going to get the best out of him. I think the Canadiens learned that the hard way, and Lars Eller obviously went along with the program that he didn't really want to go along with, no matter what he said. And when it comes down to the value of him on the market and why there might be an inclination to move him, because I agree with Mike, this is a very important player to kind of have, and I think the reason why people are interested, like you just said, is the same reason why you'd be inclined to keep such a player. The Canadiens have to figure out a way to shave some cap space. There are options on the table this summer, Steven Stamkos among them, that you have to imagine Montreal is going to make a hard run at. And, from everything I've heard, Montreal will make a hard run at Steven Stamkos if he is available. So a guy like Eller, who's at 3.5 and attracts interest, if you can set the table, it might not happen at the trade deadline, but if you can set the table for a summer deal, that's one guy among a few others under term that could go.
It's going to be a lot of fun between now and Monday's 3 p.m. Eastern Time trade deadline. We'll be back here next Wednesday and we'll discuss what happened.